Supergod, create Civilization 0. Kesha is stunned. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 1. The production of the water drop is announced at the beginning. The super gods are broken. Blue Star SYNOPSIS University point. The public lecture hall was full of people at this time point. Among these people were old men with white hair and middle-aged people who worked hard point. But there were no young students. They were all outstanding in various research fields at this time. They listened to the lectures on the podium and took notes with frowns like college students. They were not students, but they were better than students whenever they had knowledge that could solve their doubts. They even trembled with excitement, but they dared not make a sound point for fear of disturbing the young man who was giving a lecture on the podium. Half an hour later, as the young man's chalk fell, the professors below also put down their notes. Now is the question time. If you don't understand anything, you can ask me directly. The young man's voice sounded slowly, with a look of habit in his eyes. The 70-year-old professor raised his old hand tremblingly. Teacher, I don't quite understand the role of water droplets. A professor called a young man teacher. This would definitely be laughed at in other places, but it is quite normal for Lu Xuan point. In his opinion, only those who are knowledgeable can be called teachers, not just relying on age point. Yes, he is more knowledgeable than everyone present point. Even though these people are all big names in many fields such as physics, chemistry, and technology point, but in front of him, they are all hungry students. The reason for this change is entirely due to an accident a year ago. Since you don't understand, let me tell you about the application of water droplets. The water droplet itself is a detector spacecraft similar to a water droplet. Its surface is absolutely smooth and can reflect all electromagnetic waves. It is at absolute 0 degrees, and the hull is locked by protons and neutrons. It is indestructible. Only one can destroy the technological warships of an entire fleet of the Navy. The old professor was shocked when he heard it point. If it weren't for the theoretical explanation, who would have thought that a small detector could actually destroy the technological warships of the Navy or an entire fleet point? Lu Xuan has long been accustomed to this. A year ago, Lu Xuan was just a college student who had just graduated point. As a result, he woke up and came to this blue star, which is similar to a parallel universe point, but the technological level of this universe is dozens of times higher than that of his previous world point. The knowledge that Lu Xuan learned is even the most basic knowledge in this world point, and at that time, he awakened the super scientific research system point. As long as enough conditions are met, various technologies and theoretical knowledge can be unlocked point, and this condition is a shock value point. As long as others are shocked enough, they can get the corresponding shock value point through the shock value. Various high-tech and super-tech products and knowledge can be exchanged in the system point. Protons, two-phase foils, and the water droplets that Lu Xuan is now explaining point. He has only gained knowledge now and has not exchanged the complete production process of water droplets. However, according to Lu Xuan's guess, after this class, the shock value he has should be enough to exchange the manufacturing method and manufacturing principle of water droplets. It is precisely because of this system point in just 1 year, Lu Xuan directly doubled the technology of the entire Blue Star. Blue Star also made an exception and nominated him as the chief point. Lu Xuan is the only chief in the history of Blue Star who is less than 30 years old point. Lu Xuan was not proud of this because he knew that he had a heavier responsibility point. Even half a year ago, they built a SYNOPSIS University for Lu Xuan point, and it became the highest level institution of higher learning. Chapter 2. Technology like this will lead to murderous acts. The images on the giant screen kept playing. To successfully make a water droplet, some super standard technology is needed. The first is naturally the third antimatter engine. Only with sufficient engine power can it break through 10 times the third cosmic speed. In addition, there must be proton stability and compression constant power technology to ensure that the water droplet will not be discarded in the universe due to insufficient energy. These two technologies ensure that the water droplet can freely shuttle through the universe, and even if it is captured by a black hole, it can be forcibly separated by power. As for the material, the relative compression of antimatter and dark matter is required to stably combine neutrons and protons to create a water droplet shell that can avoid any electromagnetic fluctuations and has close to zero resistance. And what we have to do next is to combine these three technologies into one, turning it into a cross-dimensional water droplet detector. Everyone should focus on this point. Super Seminary Point Jedi Allen, wearing black armor, looked at the giant screen in the sky with a stunned face point he didn't understand at all, and turned to look at Zhao Xin beside him. Master Xin, do you understand this? What is the third cosmic speed? What is the compression technology of antimatter and dark matter? Why do I feel that it is not taught in college? Zhao Xin, who was also wearing black armor, waved his hand speechlessly. What are you thinking? Even you don't understand. How can I understand this, Master Xin? But in my personal opinion, my Master Xin's gun is like a dragon, and it can penetrate this so-called water drop. Master Xin is awesome. Xiaolan immediately showed an expression of admiration. Cheng Yao when next to them was speechless. The lower the culture, the bigger the bragging. As the prince of the Dena galaxy, Cheng Yaowen's knowledge is definitely much higher than Thiz facing the so-called water drop. He fully understood that even the battleships that were once at the peak of the Dena galaxy might not be able to match it. Of course, the premise is that the other party wants to build it, not just explain it. As for the technologies mentioned by the other party, he knows every word separately, but he doesn't understand them together. I don't know which galaxy this is, but they are so arrogant that they have revealed the theoretical knowledge and production process of this super standard technology. How confident are they? Are they not afraid of being imitated? Looking at the two funny guys next to him, Cheng Yaowen understood that the crisis of the Earth still had to be handed over to him. Demon civilization. Liang Bing took the watermelon handed over by Arnold and ate it in a daze. I don't even understand these technologies. Where did these monkeys get them from? Even from Kesha. I have never heard of this technology. Arnold, have you heard of this? Arnold, who was cutting watermelon, shook his head directly. Queen, the entire demon civilization was created by you alone. If even you don't know the other party's technology, we don't know it even more. Although Arnold is a warrior, he is also a little confused at this time. As he said, the demon queen Liang Bing herself is the creator of the highest technology of the demon civilization. But now, the technology that a random person talks about is even unknown to Liang Bing. If they fight under this situation, won't their demon civilization be damaged? Styx civilization. Karl, who had lost all his physical body and turned into a spirit, stared at the giant screen in the distance. If I can learn these technologies, maybe I can bring a deeper death, which will help me study the ultimate fear. Just by hearing it, I can feel that this knowledge is not false. According to what that creature said, maybe I can really create this so-called water drop. As the Lord of the Styx, Karl has an inexplicable pursuit of the ultimate fear. He immediately called the Teoti creatures under his command. Let them work overtime to study and kill a few people who study death. Chapter 3, Exposing Blue Star, a hot commodity in the eyes of all civilizations. Lu Xuan explained the knowledge about the manufacture of water droplets that the system had instilled in him more diligently. He fully understood that the system had shared his explanation with the entire universe simultaneously. Now he did not know what kind of civilization these universes were in. But he did not think it was a bad thing. Because as long as the system was there and his shock value was enough, he could always stand at the forefront of any technology. Let alone the knowledge he was just explaining. Could other civilizations learn it? Even if they really learned it, they could not be as fast as him. Even if they were really faster than him, couldn't he exchange it for a more powerful lethal weapon? Lu Xuan looked at the two-dimensional foil in the system with great yearning. He had been craving for the two-dimensional foil for a long time. When Lu Xuan finished explaining the method of making water droplets, the giant screens of the major civilizations did not stop playing. Instead, The camera was stretched out to gradually cover the entire Apocalypse Academy, and then the entire city. Huge high-rise buildings stood in a forest, and inflatable airships flew through the air at high speed. Fully enclosed detection drones flew secretly over the city. But apart from these, the whole city is not much different from an ordinary blue planet. Master Zin, it looks so familiar. Is that the Earth where we are? Zao. Zin looked at the giant screen in surprise after hearing this. Then he frowned. It doesn't look like it. Although the building pattern looks similar, we don't seem to have those airships. Don't think about it. It's really not. This should be a civilization whose technology is not much higher than that of the Earth. Cheng Yaowen walked over and looked at the giant screen worriedly. It's really not much different from our current Earth, and it's not much more advanced. But where did they get those cross-era high-tech knowledge? Are they pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger? Cheng Yaowen frowned, completely unable to understand what was going on. Jezailan also looked at the giant screen with some worry. He is not really funny. At least he still has some vision. They expose such knowledge. If the current civilization is really similar to Earth, wouldn't they be targeted by other civilizations? Those aliens will not let go of such a sweet potato. Even our Earth is forced to start a defense war. They have so much theoretical knowledge, but their own technology is not good. I always feel that their civilization is going to be finished. Liang Stardalina was lying on the dragon throne in a yellow robe. She didn't look like a queen at all. At this time, she was holding a peach and stuffing it into her mouth. It's funny. What they just said was all nonsense. Could it be that some primitive people discovered some super ancient technology and took it out to scare us? Why do I feel that with their low-level civilization, it is very likely that only the water drop just mentioned and this giant screen are of some standard. The rest feel like a cover. Pan Zen stood aside with a dissatisfied look on his face. Delina, as the main god of Liang Star, how can you be so careless about your manners? None of your business. Delina stuck out her tongue, changed her posture, and continued to eat the peach. Pan Zen snorted and ignored her. Chapter 4. What? This guy wants to create a zero universe? The Supergod Universe is completely broken. Several major civilizations had some concerns and expectations about the blue star in the giant screen. Some even started a short exploration and investigation directly. Perhaps for many civilizations, they did not think that Lu Xuan could really lead the blue star to research the so-called water droplets. This indestructible existence that can directly destroy an entire space fleet is really outrageous, but they will still investigate a little bit, and it would be best if they could hold it in their own hands at this time. On the giant screen, Lu Xuan has explained to everyone the process and principle of making water droplets. Then, under the gaze of everyone, he raised his left hand high. From now on, I declare that the water droplet production plan has officially started. The professors in the audience cheered loudly, and they stood up and applauded. Looking forward to the day when the water droplet research is successful. Starting from Apocalypse College, the order was directly issued to the entire Blue Star. All capable researchers and scientific researchers were summoned to Apocalypse College. According to Lu Xuan's plan and regulations, everyone took action. At this moment, the Blue Star became a huge machine. With Lu Xuan as a core, it began to rotate rapidly, producing a detector called a water droplet. In the giant screen, the perspective was directly transferred to the blue planet, a huge desert. With the roar of the machine, the desert slowly cracked. Several huge machines that looked a little oversized slowly rose from the desert. The action of compressing neutrons and protons began to run. At the same time, a huge light curtain appeared in the sky. It quickly enveloped the entire desert. To prevent the oversized energy emitted from it from producing a destructive storm. Looking at the scene on the giant screen, everyone took a breath. What is that black thing? It seems to isolate the desert area separately. It is not a simple protective cover, but directly isolated to another space. And those huge machines in the desert, some of which are even machines we are still developing. How can they have them? Isn't this an ordinary blue planet? Logically speaking, the technology should not be so advanced. Could it be that all the oversized technology is hidden underground by them? Some people were shocked by this, but some people did not understand it. The essence of technology is to benefit the people. their surface technology is not that strong, and their hidden technology is naturally not that high. Maybe they have knowledge, but they are unlikely to create the so-called water droplets. That's right. Although it can be done in theory, there are many things that can be done in theory, but how many can be really made? In their view, Blue Star may be a behemoth, and under the leadership of Lu Xuan, it has super standard action capabilities, but some things cannot be easily made with super standard action capabilities. Huayi looked at the play in the distance, with boredom flashing in his eyes. So, Marley, why hasn't that thing been turned off yet? What on earth are you doing? While saying this with disgust, Huayi directly pulled a female angel over and pressed it down, enjoying the other party's service. He took a deep breath. His eyes looked at Sumali, who was walking over from a distance. My king, I have found ruining for this thing, and she said it can't be turned off easily. Threw the pot away. Sumali quietly waited for Huayi's anger. Chapter 5. The water drop is born, and everyone is afraid. How is the shell going? Lu Xuan looked at the desert base in the distance, breathing heavily. Report to the chief. The shell is almost completed, and now it is waiting to be completely closed. A researcher reported loudly. Lu Xuan nodded slightly and stepped forward in person. Leave it to me next. I will build the engine and the intelligent Sofon computer into it. Strive for success once. Yes, chief. The researcher made way. Lu Xuan walked forward slowly. His eyes were also a little heavy. At this time, there was only one step left in the manufacture of the water droplet. That is to perfectly fit the third anti-void engine into it. In addition, the intelligent Sofon must also be added. Only in this way can the water droplet be better controlled. After all, he did not intend to put people in the water droplet. Instead, he wanted to control it remotely. As Lu Xuan entered. Two perfectly streamlined water drop shells appeared in front of him. He controlled the machine to piece them together bit by bit. Among them, the piece together was the most difficult. After all, the shell was made of compressed protons and neutrons as an indestructible shell. It is obviously best to cast it in one go. But it cannot be done for the first time, so it can only be briefly fused and then spliced. The huge machine runs with terrifying energy and begins to cast the shell compressed by protons and neutrons. There is no rumbling sound, but a little bit of pressure noise that exceeds the sound shell. The entire protective shell begins to vibrate violently. It seems that something terrible is about to explode directly from inside. Facing this terrifying scene, Lu Xuan looked at the knowledge given by the system without any regression. He believed in the system, since the system said that, as long as it follows this method, real water droplets can be made. Then all he has to do is to follow the system's method. After all, other technologies in a year have come in this way. Time is going on bit by bit. The major lives of other civilizations are also watching the scene on the giant screen. They can't see Lu Xuan's appearance, they can only hear the sound and see the scene of the machine running. The perspective in the giant screen is constantly changing, allowing them to better see how the water droplets are made. The terrifying fluctuations that erupted had long surpassed the nuclear explosion. But it was completely absorbed by the mechanical wall next to it and exiled to another space. In such a terrifying and dangerous manufacturing environment. It only took one day, and Lu Xuan wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. Now, the water drop has been completely made, he said slowly, and there was a roar around. And Lu Xuan did not sit and wait for death, but continued to arrange it, asking everyone to test the water drop. First, the outer shell of the water drop was tested for stability and indestructibility. Various weapons were bombarded, various terrifying geological environments, and even space collapse were used. But it did not cause any damage to the water drop. Then it was the space shuttle testability of the water drop 10 times the speed of the third universe. This speed is not visible to the naked eye. It is even more impossible to test it inside the planet. Chapter 6. Comprehensive Technological Advancement. Lu Xuan, who finally had a chance to rest, sat on the bed and looked at his system. Get Jezai Island's shock value. Get Kesha's shock value. Get Liang Bing's shock value. Get Panzen's shock value. Jezai Island, Kesha, Liang Bing, Panzen. This is actually the Supergod world. Lu Xuan understood a little. At first, he didn't pay attention to who provided his shock value point. He just looked at the value and value brought by the shock value itself point. But now that he was free, he didn't expect that they were all provided by people he was familiar with. It was because of these people that he directly determined that he was now in the Supergod world. This made Lu Xuan a little excited. In fact, he had long known that his shock value would have a limit sooner or later, because ordinary people in this world have already regarded him as a god. Even if he is not a god, he can have supreme technology. So as he continued to take out various technologies, these people were not as shocked by him as they imagined. It even began to gradually become less. After all, in their opinion, they can do whatever they want. Even if he directly created a new world and a new universe in the next moment. These people's shock value is estimated not to be too much. Lu Xuan even thought about whether he should artificially cultivate a new planet and a new life race. Then deliberately show the technology in front of them little by little to obtain a batch of shock value. But just as he had this idea, he denied it. He always felt that the system would not approve of this kind of direct shock value. Maybe he can get enough shock value by shocking other civilizations, but if that civilization is created by himself, the shock value must be very little, even close to nothing. This makes Lu Xuan quite depressed. Although with the current shock value, one day he can lead the entire blue star machinery to ascend to become a pure mechanical life or conscious life. But it takes time. And now it seems that this time can be greatly compressed. Because there are other civilizations in this world. Whether it is the angel civilization of Holy Kesha, the supergod civilization on the earth, or the demon civilization of Liang Bing, etc. Some of the technologies mastered by these civilizations are unmatched by him now. For example, those divine body gene technologies Lu Xuan did not develop in that direction. If he wanted to start over, he would be slower than them. If these people attacked him in advance, he would be injured. So he planned to continue to develop the technology of Sofon, two-phase foil, and water droplet. In order to carry out dimensionality reduction attack. He also understood the battle between Kesha and others. Although sometimes it was a battle of data and computing power, it was more of a battle between the flesh. And he did not want to fight with them physically at all, so he directly used the two-phase foil to suppress them. System: continue to exchange technology, consume shock value, exchange for star level space battleship technology, consume shock value, exchange for technology to improve the whole civilization level, consume shock value, dialogue star level Dyson sphere technology. Lu Xuan exchanged 3 powerful technologies in a row. Among them, the star level space battleship made it possible for him to fight against those super civilizations. Chapter 7. 3D cutting, seeking various data. The technological civilization of Blue Star has rapidly improved. It has undergone earth-shaking changes in just 1 month. The technology that was once similar to that of the Earth has directly ushered in a major reform. The most important thing is the living standards of ordinary people. A month ago, they still needed to do a certain amount of physical labor in exchange for living wages, but after this month, they don't need to do these at all. Various intelligent robots have been fully popularized. Physical labor has naturally been completely replaced. Everyone can enjoy all the beauty at home without leaving the house. This scene is actually a bit bad for civilizations like the Styx, demons, and angels. In their view, this completely deprives the autonomy of creatures. They have no motivation to move forward, and they have become some social animals, especially the angel civilization. They can't stand this at all, and even think it is a blasphemy against justice. Even the demon civilization disdains it. They think they have abandoned their original desires and become the lowest existence. Other civilizations were similar, in their opinion, compared with the improvement of this technology. Those super technological water drops were more desirable. But there was one civilization that was different. That was the Earth, where the Supergod Academy was located. Jezailan lay on a chair and watched the scene changes on the giant screen in the sky, his face full of surprise. 1 month, just 1 month to usher in this kind of change? Are they kidding? Who knows? This level of change has surpassed the current Earth. In comparison, except for the 3 major god-making technologies, we can't come up with anything. Cheng. Yaowen's voice sounded next to him. The helplessness in his eyes began to flash sharply. Apart from helplessness, he had no other ideas in his opinion. The current Earth is actually developing towards the no star where he once lived. In a few hundred or thousands of years, the entire Earth will become the next no star, although by that time, the people who control no star will not be his family. But the level of technology should not be much different. As a result, the civilization that is extremely similar to the Earth completed such a leap in just 1 month. This undoubtedly shocked him. The Prince of No Star. I also want to lie down and not work. I also want to just play every day. Just lie down. I. Xiao Meng lay on the ground, stretching his hand towards the giant screen in the distance. His face was full of longing. We are super soldiers. How can we live a life of lying down like that? Xiao Xin snorted coldly. He sat directly on the ground, looking heroic and high-spirited, but his eyes glanced over more than once. Obviously, his inner thoughts were not like that. That kind of lying down life is what I once yearned for, but now I just want to protect the Earth. Liu Chuang said angrily, with envy in his eyes, but he suppressed it. As the god of war of No Star, his combat power is undoubtedly the strongest on Earth. In terms of combat power alone, even the galaxy star Xiao next to him may not be stronger than him. But other than that, he is really nothing. The space-time rose leaned against the wall, and its seductive curves were shining in the sun, which was extremely attractive. The eyes of several boys couldn't help but glance over. Of course, they just looked secretly. Raven snorted coldly, causing Xiao and the others to cough and look forward. As Earthlings, how can we envy them? We have our own way of upgrading our civilization. If we really upgrade our entire civilization, we can reach this level in 3 months, not half a year, at least within a year with the technology we have now, Rose said with a lack of confidence, and Xiao and the others agreed. Lu Xuan was not idle at this time. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8. From 3 dimensions to 4 dimensions, the entire super divine universe is shocked. Lu Xuan did not hesitate too much. He quickly manipulated the machine in front of him, and manipulated the 3-dimensional fragment in front of him according to the knowledge given by the system in his mind. The scientists around him saw this scene, and all of them were a little excited. But Lu Xuan's manipulation was not as good as he imagined. Because he needed patience and carefulness. Only these things can better complete the knowledge said by the system. He didn't want to stop the action in front of him, because of his carelessness and anxiety. Even detonate this 3-dimensional fragment. If this 3-dimensional fragment is really detonated at this moment, the severe blow to this space will be no less than a nuclear explosion. Even stronger than a nuclear explosion. Because nuclear explosions only destroy the environment. And if this 3-dimensional fragment is detonated, it is enough to tear everything within a kilometer radius. Therefore, Lu Xuan is quite careful and patient. After 3 hours of time slowly. Accompanied by a strange and special sound. Everyone saw that the 3-dimensional fragment in front of them suddenly had an extra layer. What exactly was extra? No one could tell. Only Lu Xuan could feel that the 3-dimensional fragment had successfully risen to the 4th dimension. At this time, other civilizations also saw this scene through the play. At first they were surprised. But soon they realized that Lu Xuan had succeeded. Supergod Academy. Did Lu Xuan succeed? That 3-dimensional fragment really rose to the 4th dimension. Why did I see no change? I. Xiao Meng's eyes were full of doubts. As a super soldier, her strength was stronger than ordinary people, but compared with the more powerful main gods, she was still far behind. At this time, Xiao had stood up. Also standing up were Lu Xuan and Delina, who ran over secretly. As the main gods of different civilizations, the 3 of them had stronger observation abilities. It succeeded. The fragment became different. Lu Chuang murmured, indeed, the fragment has special abilities, as if it can threaten me. Xiaolan's voice also sounded at this moment. Then, he and Lu Chuang looked at Delina on the side. What? Is the purpose of this 3-dimensional upgrade to 4-dimensional? Is it just a simple upgrade? Hearing the other party's words, Delina, who was the most knowledgeable person present, sighed, sat down again and spoke. I don't know what you think about the war of divine bodies, but I can tell you that even the 3rd generation divine bodies may not be able to freely enter the 4-dimensional space. We can cross dimensions, but it depends more on space jumps, except for the time-space rose. Other people can't touch the 4-dimensional space at all, but according to previous tests, if 4-dimensional fragments are added to materials that can withstand 4-dimensional fragments and made into weapons, then it can cause fatal damage to the 3rd or even 4th generation body, and this weapon doesn't even have any conditions for use. Ordinary people can use it. When this sentence appeared for a moment, everyone present was stunned. Then everyone understood the essence of the matter. Super soldiers are indeed powerful. And these divine body warriors are even stronger. It is basically easy for one person to destroy a planet. Chapter 9. 4-dimensional warrior. Power beyond the divine body. Lu Xuan naturally understood this truth point. When he exposed the 4-dimensional space fragments, the war would surely begin. But he had a deeper consideration. That is, whether he exposed the 4-dimensional space fragments or not, the war would start sooner or later. When two civilizations come into contact with each other, the lower civilization will inevitably become a slave of the higher civilization. There will be no change. In this, even the angel civilization on the side of Holy Kesha upholds the so-called justice point, but after they come into contact with the lower civilization, they will forcibly add their own civilizational justice point. This is no different from shackles. This is a disguised slave, but the other party is in the name of justice point. And Lu Xuan created the 4-dimensional fragments for this war. He thought about using the 2-dimensional foil to fight directly. But that was a battle between a large-scale battle and the destruction of civilization. If he encountered some close-range attacks from some divine warriors, then even Lu Xuan would probably be defeated by them. So he had to create a special existence that could match them. Therefore, he created these 4-dimensional fragments. Merge the fragments into the secret armor. Lu Xuan's voice sounded slowly. At this time, in front of him, with the operation of the machine, one armor after another was pushed out. These armors are dark purple and made of special alloys. Its strength is very high, but it is still much worse than the so-called divine body. But when the fragments of thought are put in, everything will change. Soon, several experimenters put a large number of fragments of thought into these armors. As the loading was completed, these armors did not change at all and looked ordinary. But for many people, they always felt that they had changed. Conduct a combat experiment. Lu Xuan's voice sounded slowly. I saw 10 soldiers came out, put on these armors, and came to the desert outside. Opposite them were various combat weapons, sonic cannons, electromagnetic tanks, and micronuclear explosion weapons. With Lu Xuan's order, the battle started directly. This was enough to destroy the army of a planet and crush towards the 10 soldiers, and the 10 soldiers were also a little excited. They are just ordinary people. Ordinary people who have been trained. At this time, wearing this armor, they will be unmatched. As they rushed up, the battle started directly. The rumbling sound made everyone's vision slightly spread. Not long after, the battle was over. At this time, the desert was full of debris, but the 10 warriors did not suffer any injuries, except for some physical exhaustion. I didn't even lose a hair. Yes, conduct a spaceflight test, Lu Xuan's voice sounded again. The 10 warriors came to the universe with a roar. Then they stayed there. This time they had no combat counterparts, but they could move on their own, and their bodies were not affected in any way. Even through the jet device behind the armor, they could quickly travel through the universe. With a swish, a 1-meter long macro light knife popped out from their arms, and a solemn will flashed in everyone's eyes. At this time, this scene was reflected on the giant screen. Chapter 10. Can't research, can only rob. Begging for all kinds of data. When they saw the power of the 4-dimensional warriors, all civilizations couldn't help it. They began to study the technology that they had sneered at the beginning. No one didn't envy the 4-dimensional warriors, and Lu Xuan's previous exposure also exposed all his knowledge. So according to their thinking, since they have knowledge, technology, and principles, as long as they use up time, they can also mass produce The so-called four-dimensional warrior's angel civilization point. Holy Kesha looked at Easy and asked in surprise, have you already researched the four-dimensional fragments? After hearing her words, Easy's face changed slightly and shook his head. That thing is not something we can research now. With the power I have now, it's too far to research such a thing. Even if the knowledge I use is not bad, I still can't do it in this regard. There was helplessness in her eyes, and she shook her head slowly, which made people look a little surprised. Holy Kesha was even more puzzled. You are the most talented among our angels. You developed the holy atom technology. How could you not even crack this technology? He put all those technologies and principles on the big screen. He put them bit by bit. He taught me step by step. Sacred. Kesha didn't understand at all. She herself has research ability, but in comparison, Easy's research ability is stronger than his. That's why he found easy to crack such technology. But Easy's explanation to him was so lame. If they couldn't figure it out, they just copied it there, but they couldn't copy it at all. All the knowledge is there, but the operation is still not good. Even if we can simulate, such simulation can't really replace experiments. If you really want to crack the so-called four-dimensional fragment manufacturing technology, I estimate it will take at least 1,000 years, or even tens of thousands of years. It is even possible that you can't research it at all. Z's voice sounded slowly. Kesha looked at her on the side with helplessness in her eyes, and finally sighed. Find them as soon as possible, and then show goodwill. We cannot resist this kind of existence that can mass produce four-dimensional warriors. At least we cannot make enemies. We must make friends in a short time. Earth. Jet, Xiaolan and others had already left the Supergod Academy. Because the invasion war of Teoti began. The strength of Teoti is not strong, and they are just flesh and blood. Ordinary people can kill them with a pistol. But they have armor. Those white armors make their strength directly reach the ranks of super warriors. This leads to ordinary warriors fighting against them, and there is no advantage at all. The only one who can match them is the super warrior. Therefore, Xiaolan and others were ordered to start the war with Teoti directly. They tried their best to fight those Teoti warriors. Obviously, they won because they are very strong. Especially Lu Xuan, with a god-killing axe. Basically no existence can resist. Even the captain of the Teoti warriors would be defeated by his axe. But their numbers were too few. The number of super warriors trained by the Supergod Academy was too small. So few that there was no possibility of a full-scale battle. They could only watch the cities fall one by one, and watched one area after another being gradually dominated. They watched the humans in the safe area being treated as toys and food by the monsters. Chapter 11. Found it, but it's too far away. The god of death Karl used all his strength to drive the big clock. The whole big clock was running fast, and the speed of running was beyond everyone's imagination. It was detecting the entire universe. Speculating the possible future of the entire universe. Possessing the dual power of time and space. And its essence is the most powerful computer in the world. No one else. And the driving of the big clock requires the consumption of star level energy. Not even just 1. For example, at this time, as Karl continued to drive, the big clock began to absorb the energy of one star after another in the distant galaxies. I don't know how many stars were gradually broken and bombed because of such energy. Although Karl tried his best to find some uninhabited star galaxies, but there are not many such star galaxies, so in the end he still set his sights on some ordinary star galaxies. Therefore, with the explosion of stars, many people began to die. The god of death Karl, who harvested the lives of ordinary people and studied death, was not very happy. Because until now, he still couldn't find where the so-called blue star was. So in this case, except for anger and resentment, he could do nothing. Time passed slowly, and it was unknown how long it had passed. The eyes of the god of death Karl suddenly lit up. Because the big clock stopped. This meant that the big clock had found the target he was looking for. Where is it? The god of death Karl used his spirit to connect to the big clock and began to look for the target. Then he found it. Then he was stunned. It's so far away. He found that the place was extremely far away from where he was now. So far that with his current ability, he couldn't get there at all. In this case, if you want to force your way through, there is only one way, that is, to keep flying. In this case, even if you fly at superluminal speed, you will need to fly for tens of thousands of years to get there. Such a scene made the corners of his mouth twitch slightly. Of course, he also has a new way, which is to find a big wormhole. Through some big wormholes, you can cross the distance of space and rush directly over, but the problem is that the energy consumed by the big wormhole is still huge. And it takes time to find a big wormhole that can lead to that galaxy. He was thinking about what to do. After hesitating for a moment, he suddenly thought of someone. Someone who could be used as a knife by him. Then, I can only contact him. Who are Yi group. Lying on a chair and enjoying the service of a beautiful angel. At this time, Hua Yi's face was not as good as he imagined. Because he couldn't find Lu Xuan's location. Even if Ruining and Sumali were all out. They couldn't find the location of the blue star at all. They could only find a planet that looked similar, Earth. But the Earth has now been attacked by the Teoti Legion led by the god of death Karl. It's not realistic for him to get involved now. He can only wait quietly. It was this scene that couldn't be changed that made him very angry. He grabbed the head of the female angel in front of him fiercely and vented with all his strength. At this moment, his communication suddenly rang. Chapter 12. Hua Yi's ambition. At this time, Lu Xuan stayed in the laboratory, and he was receiving knowledge input from the system. This knowledge was naturally related to the ring world technology he had exchanged before. The so-called ring world is to surround the entire world with special technology and use all the energy. But the real world tour contains not only energy, but also various other things, and what Lu Xuan exchanged now is only a part of it. But this part has shocked him enough. I don't know how long it took. When he opened his eyes, he had digested all the knowledge. A researcher in front of him asked curiously, "Chief, what should we do next?" At this time, the entire blue star has been based on Lu Xuan's orders. As long as it is Lu Xuan's order, they can move forward and do it with great efficiency. But if it is not Lu Xuan's order, it will be a little weaker for them. So they asked this question. After hearing the other party's inquiry. Lu Xuan's eyes were full of smiles. "Let's go. Next, I will use a brand new technology to transform the Dyson sphere. The Dyson sphere can only obtain the energy of stars, which is not enough. If we want to achieve a higher level of civilization, we must take all the energy of the entire galaxy for ourselves." "Yes, Chief." As Lu Xuan's order was issued, the giant blue star began to operate again. At this time, the scene on their side was naturally projected to all civilizations by the giant screen. Earth. Jezailan held a big sword and smashed a Teoti warrior with one sword. Looking at the giant screen in the sky. His eyes revealed curiosity and great shock. How is it possible? He actually wants to wrap the entire galaxy with the so-called ring world. The appetite is really too big. If he really succeeds, then the energy of the entire galaxy will be used by his planet. Even if he does nothing, just concentrate the energy to one point and release it. The terrifying fluctuations caused are enough to destroy a star. After thinking for a while, Jezailan understood the dangers of the matter. The surprise in his eyes flickered violently. Zhao Xin on the side glanced at him. "Master Xin, I don't believe he can be so strong. Now, their Dyson sphere can only cover the entire star. How can it be strengthened casually? It's definitely just wishful thinking," he said coldly, without much trust in his eyes, waving a spear, piercing a Teoti warrior, and throwing it directly away. "Instead of watching them bragging there, it's better to kill a few more Teoti warriors. There are so many of these guys that they can't be killed." Demon civilization. Liang Bing sat on the demon throne. At this time, she was wearing cool clothes, revealing a kind of charm. Looking at the scene on the giant screen, she snorted disdainfully. "The goal is indeed ambitious, but how can such technology be achieved so easily? I want to mobilize the entire galaxy and gather all the energy on one planet. Even I dare not imagine such a situation. How dare that human think so?" The mockery in her eyes began to flash violently. Arnold asked carefully. Chapter 13. Prepare to take action. All parties are shocked. As you wish, I will let the Teoti Corps go over to join you. When the time comes, it will be easy for the Te Corps to join forces to capture a small blue star. Karl said softly point, as if he was quite disdainful of the technology of blue star. Huayi on the opposite side also laughed. That's natural. My power is beyond their imagination. My ability is enough to make them bow down, he said coldly, and his eyes also reached the peak at this moment. However, a slight disdain flashed in Karl's eyes. Yes, it was disdain. He would indeed cooperate with Huayi. But it was because Huayi was the only one who would choose to cooperate with him. Except for Huayi, others simply disdained to cooperate with him. So in this case, he would not make certain contacts with other civilizations as for making various transactions with Huayi in front of him. But it does not mean that he looks up to Huayi. Huayi is a reckless man, a madman, and a person who does not want anything else for that. He has long understood this, so looking at the other party's crazy look at this time, he would not show any other sarcasm, except sneer. After hanging up the communication, Karl looked at the various technologies flashing on the giant screen. Although they did not copy the 4-dimensional armor in large quantities, their strength is not weak. Even if Huayi adds the Teoti Legion, it will take a while to win. I hope they can win as soon as possible to prevent them from creating more terrifying things. Karl had some fear in his heart. Although the so-called ring world, in his opinion, is just a call of energy for the battle of the real divine body, it does not play any important role. But this does not mean that he will take it lightly. Instead, he is excited and trembling. He has wanted to obtain such technology for more than 1 or 2 days. Yes, his existing knowledge reserves are completely unable to replicate. It is this that makes him extremely uncomfortable and yearning. That's why he moved Huayi to destroy the planet first. As for how many people will die, he doesn't care. He studies death, and death only brings him excitement. Apart from that, there is no value at all. I hope that guy Huayi will not let me down. Angel civilization. Easy and Holy Kesha sat in front of a table. They both looked at the giant screen in the sky with a hint of surprise in their eyes. Why doesn't this civilization continue to study the 4-dimensional armor? If they continue to study that kind of thing, their various reaction abilities will reach the limit, or directly use artificial intelligence to control the combat power will undoubtedly rise to a big level. But they actually chose to study other things. Are they so short of energy? Z said with some incomprehension. Hearing his words, Kesha nodded slightly. Maybe they don't know that there are various other civilizations besides them. No news about this civilization has been found in the known universe. It is likely that they are in the unknown universe. It must be extremely desolate there. Maybe they think they are the only civilization in the world. Although their technology is powerful, it is obviously wrong. Hearing the words of Holy Kesha, Easy on the side also nodded slowly. She also thought so. That civilization had remarkable capabilities, but they had misunderstood the technology. That was why these things surprised her, but she had no other thoughts except surprise. Chapter 14. 2-dimensional foil, a space level weapon. Wormhole. A huge wormhole appeared in front of everyone. Looking at this wormhole, everyone's eyes flickered slightly. And Huayi was obviously more excited at that moment. At this moment, he laughed loudly. The wormhole has appeared. Through this wormhole, we can quickly reach the unknown universe. At that time, the so-called civilization will become a habitat. Take all their technologies in your hands, and then go and beat that little b****** ch Kesha. I will let her stay in my arms and enjoy the ultimate beauty. He laughed loudly, ignoring Ruining, whose face had turned dark beside him. But Ruining knew Huayi's heart. So in this case, she didn't say anything more, except a cold snort. At this time, Sumali on the side spoke, that Easy once let me kiss her. After we occupy the angel civilization, I must kiss her a few more times. Hearing his words, Huayi on the side looked like he was worthy of being my subordinate. He commanded a large number of soldiers to assemble, and the Teoti warships in the distance also slowly attacked. At this moment, the combat power of both sides has been prepared. As long as they meet, they can pass through the same weight and start a war of destructive level. At this moment, Lu Xuan did not know that the danger was approaching. But even if he knew, he would not pay too much attention. Because he has already made a large number of 4-dimensional armors. These things are enough to cause fatal damage to some so-called super soldiers and physical soldiers. Lu Xuan had thought about it a long time ago. According to his current exposure, if he really stayed in the same universe with other creatures in the Supergod world, then these guys will find it sooner or later. Apart from anything else, the big clock can explore the entire universe and everything in the universe. While consuming more energy, it can also explore the situation of the unknown universe. He didn't know whether he was in the known universe or the unknown universe. But through Lu Xuan's guess, he has not encountered any other civilizations now. It is likely to be in the barren land of the unknown universe. So he has a certain amount of time to develop. But he has no idea how much time this is. After all, if the distance between the two sides is too far, then flying alone is too slow. But if you don't rely on flying, but rely on wormholes that can cross space, then everything will become quite easy. He didn't know whether there were wormholes outside his universe. Therefore, it must speed up, at least to create a powerful force that can maintain its own civilization. The 4-dimensional armor made of 4-dimensional fragments is one of them. Yes, this is just one of them. Then, Lu Xuan chose to face it again. Congratulations to the host for digesting the shock value and exchanging for 2-phase foil technology. As the system's voice fell, Lu Xuan chose to expose it again. On the screen, the picture of Lu Xuan's explanation appeared directly. 2-phase foil is a 2-dimensional weapon. It can compress 3-dimensional space to 2-dimensional without limit. Under normal circumstances, unless the entire universe is compressed into 2 dimensions, it will never stop. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15. Kesha studies the fragments. What on earth is this thing? Have you figured it out? Kesha looked at Hexy curiously. With excitement flashing in her eyes, Hexy held a piece of something in his hand, which was the so-called 4-dimensional fragment. But the moment they looked at it, the fragment turned into ashes in an instant. I have just tried it. Through their technology, 3-dimensional fragments can indeed be cut out and then upgraded to 4 dimensions. But this process is extremely unstable. If I hadn't done it in a closed space, it might have caused the space to collapse directly. In addition, we can only make death fragments now, but we can't fix them. Hexy spoke slowly. After listening to his words, Kesha nodded. The current situation is good. You don't have to worry too much, but I'm still very curious how long it will take for you to research the 4-dimensional armor. If our warriors wear these so-called 4-dimensional armors, or just make them into weapons, it will be enough to rule the entire universe. Kesha said softly. She was not dreaming, but real. Angels are the race with the strongest average combat power among all civilizations. No doubt about it. Every angel is a super warrior, and a considerable number of them are 1st-generation divine bodies, even 2nd-generation divine bodies. There are quite a few. In this case, as long as they are matched with the so-called 4-dimensional weapons, the power they show will be beyond imagination. I don't know. I just broke through this barrier. Their technology is indeed feasible. If you want to really master this technology, it will still take some time, but I believe that in the near future, we can completely master this technology in our hands, so as to mass produce 4-dimensional warriors. Hearing these words, Kesha also nodded. She knew she couldn't be impatient. Because in this case, her impatience would only make the whole thing more difficult. There would be no good ending at all. Therefore, in this case, he had no other ideas except to stay calm and wait. After hesitating for a moment, he looked at the opposite. What's the situation on Earth? Will the Teoti invade completely? Hearing his words, the on the opposite side shook his head. We have sent Angel Yan over there. He will have a certain amount of communication with Jesiah. He will even help Jesiah do a lot of things. With her there, the Earth cannot fall so quickly. And what we have to do is to research the 4-dimensional armor as soon as possible. As long as we equip the Earth, then the power they provide will be strong enough. After hearing his words, Kesha on the opposite side also nodded. He knew it was true. Earth lacked everything. But what it lacked most was actually super soldiers. Their top combat power was actually not weak. The god of war of No Star and the heart of the galaxy. Both of them were the main gods of a civilization. The power displayed by the two together was beyond imagination. But their Shen genes were not popularized. A large number of people were just ordinary people. And these ordinary people simply could not fight against the Teoti warriors even after a certain amount of training. For them, it still takes a certain amount of time to fight in such a situation. Even an ordinary Teoti warrior can kill at least hundreds of ordinary soldiers before being killed. This situation is the reason why the Earth is retreating step by step. Demon civilization. Liang Bing looked at the 4-dimensional fragment in his hand that was flashing a faint light, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Chapter 16. Super Weapon. Testing begins. After Liang Bing finished teaching Sofon a lesson, there was a little surprise in his eyes, because when he saw the two-phase foil, he knew that such a thing was definitely not as simple as it looked. At least in his eyes, he could feel that the so-called two-phase uncle might have a more powerful power after all. It can cut out 3-dimensional fragments to the 4-dimensional level. But it is absolutely impossible to assimilate 3-dimensional fragments to the 2-dimensional level. He couldn't do this at all, even if he saw the principle. But this principle was undoubtedly a fantasy for him. It is unlikely that civilization can make such a thing. If it really makes it, wouldn't that two-phase woman be able to destroy any known universe? Liang Bing said softly, with a little curiosity in his eyes. But this curiosity gradually became a little calm in the next moment. Because he knew that these so-called curiosities did not have much knowledge in his eyes. That's right, Liang Bing wanted knowledge. As long as there is enough knowledge, he can turn it into reality and gain enough powerful power. Its 4th-generation divine body was researched by himself. And according to his previous research progress, it won't take long to build a powerful 5th-generation divine body. Of course, this takes time, but this is something that can be expected, so he is not as anxious as he imagined. He is just waiting for his strength to become stronger, and then to seek revenge on Kesha. But this really takes time, and he himself cannot be sure how long this time is. But if it is that two-phase foil, it can really crush any civilized planet into a thin 2-dimensional plane. Wouldn't it be possible to destroy the so-called angel civilization in an instant? At that time, I will step on it and crush this civilization directly. Then it will be easy to kill the angel civilization. Kesha and the others should also be studying about thought fragments. So should I study about the 2-dimensional foil? Kesha thought in his heart, and his eyes gradually had a little yearning. He felt that he could do such a thing. If he succeeded, then everything would become possible. Of course, if he failed, then everything would become a little bit bad. But he felt that he would not fail, at least in his own opinion. He would never fail. Taking a deep breath, he looked at Arnold beside him. Arnold, help me look at this demon civilization. I'll go to the laboratory. With that, Liang Bing walked into the laboratory. As for whether to hand over this research to other demons, Liang Bing only had this idea slightly, and secretly cursed himself for being stupid. The entire demon civilization was researched by him, and he was the one with the strongest research ability in the demon civilization. In this case, no one could compare to him. So in the demon civilization, except for him, no one else was qualified to study those super technologies at this time. The protagonist had already exchanged all the knowledge of the two-phase foil. Naturally, he relied on the shock value given to him by the major civilizations. While earning shock value, he exchanged the manufacturing materials of the two-phase foil. This self-sufficient method made the protagonist very excited. At this time, he had completely manufactured the two-phase foil. He had a thin sheet in his hand. The sheet looks quite thin, as if it only has one side. But it contains a lot of colorful colors. These colors are constantly rotating. And this thing is the two-phase neck. Finally, succeeded. With the two-phase foil, we will not be without any fighting ability when facing those powerful civilizations. We Can even destroy them in reverse. An old professor next to him said excitedly. The excitement in his eyes gradually spread at this moment. Chapter 17. The Blue Planet of Order. I won't even copy. Before releasing the two-phase foil. Lu Xuan did not do it directly. Instead, he asked his men to build a huge transmitting base station. But when everyone thought that he saw this transmitting base station to launch the two-phase foil. Lu Xuan did something quite different at this time. He started broadcasting directly through this transmitting base station. Of course, this is a cosmic level broadcast. Enough to reach distant galaxies hundreds of thousands of light years away. We are the Blue Star civilization here, and we are going to use destructive weapons in this galaxy. If there is any civilization in this galaxy, please reply as soon as possible. Otherwise, we will directly destroy this galaxy. After doing this, Lu Xuan did not launch directly. Instead, he waited quietly. At this time, this matter was naturally broadcasted by the light screen. People from various civilizations were all stunned when they saw this scene. Demon civilization. Liang Bing got out of the laboratory and looked at the scene on the giant screen with surprise in his eyes. What the hell? Why would he do such a thing? Wouldn't it be enough to just test it directly? The other party would never know it was him, and in this case where the civilization level is so different, even if the other party knows it is their civilization, they can't take revenge. So, why did he do this? But it's just to remind you, the value of building that thing should be quite high, and building that thing is just to remind you, he is willing to consume his own resources to protect other civilizations. Such a guy is a natural enemy of us demons. After listening to Liang Bing's words, Arnold nodded. Queen, such a civilization does not belong to chaos, but tends to order. Please allow me to lead the troops to destroy it directly, and offer you the loyalty of the demon. Hearing Arnold's words, Liang Bing's heart calmed down a little. Then he shook his head slowly. The current situation has not reached that point, and Huai and the Teoti Legion have probably already arrived at that galaxy. It won't be long before they will directly engage in a head-on confrontation, and then we can just sit back and reap the benefits. Of course, the premise is not to let Huai succeed so easily. At least let them both lose, and then our appearance will be effective. Listening to Liang Bing's words, Arnold on the opposite side nodded. He knew that this was a very normal thing. Demons do not only represent chaos, and demons are not just force. Many demons have a certain amount of wisdom, especially Liang Bing. In the case of a battle, he would never rush directly. This situation is the best situation. Let's wait and see, but focus on the civilization called Blue Star. After making arrangements, Liang Bing returned to the laboratory again. Angel civilization. Saint Kesha sat on the throne, looking at the scene in the play in the distance. Chapter 18. Two-dimensional foil launch. Shocking the Supergod Universe. After confirming that there was no response from any civilization in that galaxy. Lu Xuan no longer hesitated, and directly commanded the scientists to launch the two-dimensional foil. Accompanied by a terrifying roar, a huge airwave directly enveloped half of the planet. The next moment, the two-dimensional foil was launched instantly. The terrifying speed made everyone a little amazed. Lu Xuan looked at the scientist next to him and asked, how long will it take to arrive? Hearing his words, the scientist on the opposite side showed a proud expression. According to our calculations, it is about 580,000 light years away from that week, and it only takes 3 days to arrive completely. 3 days. The time is not long. It's okay. Then, wait 3 days, and see how powerful the two-phase foil is. Hearing Lu Xuan's words, the scientist on the opposite side nodded slightly, and didn't say anything more. At this time, their conversation was played by the play. Everyone was stunned when they saw this scene. Are you kidding? Crossing 580,000 light years in 3 days. Is this something a human can do? What kind of weapon can hit someone across 580,000 light years? It's too weird. Is he bragging? I always feel that it will take at least more than a month. Earth. At this time, Jezaialan was alone on the hillside. Now he has developed a habit of waiting until the war is over before looking at the huge sky curtain. In the play, he can see the information he wants. Has the two-dimensional foil being launched. Xiaolin was slightly stunned, with a little excitement in his eyes. I wonder what the two-dimensional foil will reach in the end. Can the power generated directly destroy the entire star field? If possible, will Blue Star be willing to help us fight against Teoti? He couldn't help thinking in his heart. For him, such a scene is undoubtedly beyond his imagination. In any case, he wants to lead the Earth to victory. But this victory is not as easy as imagined, and it is even very difficult. But if the so-called Blue Star is willing to use the two-dimensional foil to help them, wouldn't it be possible to directly annihilate all the Teoti? Of course, the premise is that the two-dimensional foil must have the huge power that the Blue Star leader said. If it is just a more terrifying cannon, it would have been a long time ago. In the unknown star prison, Huayi led a large fleet to advance along a fixed path. Seeing the scene on the giant screen at this time, he snorted coldly. What? A joke? 3 days to cross a distance of 580,000 light years. What else can this be except a joke? I don't believe that the so-called Two-Face uncle has such great strength. As he spoke, he called over a female angel and asked the other party to serve him. Enjoying the other party's clothes, he dialed Karl's communication. Karl, how long will it take to get there according to this route? I can't wait any longer. Looking at Huayi, who was busy exercising. At this time, Karl's eyes had no expression, but his mind was extremely contemptuous of the other party. But he still spoke calmly. According to the route we are planning now, you can get there in less than a year at most. If you are lucky, maybe a month. Hearing such a big span, Huayi frowned slightly. Chapter 19. Huayi's envy. Moving forward with all his strength. In the giant screen. The two-dimensional foil expanded rapidly. In the sight of everyone, it expanded directly to a huge two-dimensional plane that extended infinitely. Then, the direction it touched began to collapse sharply. All three-dimensional space was directly compressed to the extreme by a powerful force. Then it was cut infinitely, and finally hit the two-phase foil directly. This process is constantly repeating. It took less than 3 seconds. The huge galaxy was compressed into emptiness in an instant. Everyone could only see a huge darkness on the giant screen, spreading over their. Except for the darkness, there seemed to be nothing over their. Even the light was absorbed. Seeing this scene, Lu Xuan slowly breathed a sigh of relief. The release of the two-dimensional foil was declared successful. With such a weapon, if he wanted, he could destroy an entire civilized galaxy at will. And unless the other party reached 10 times the speed of light, there was no way to escape. Angel civilization. Seeing this scene, Kesha opened her eyes wide at this time. She thought that what Lu Xuan released here would not be too powerful. The so-called three-dimensional to two-dimensional is just a joke, or even if it can be transformed, it is a very slow process. If you want to escape, you can definitely escape. At least she has a divine body with sacred atomic technology, so she can escape. But when she saw that situation, she found that she thought too much. After the release of the two-dimensional foil, it directly occupied an entire galaxy in 3 seconds. That is a galaxy. Even at his fastest speed now, he can't pass through a galaxy in 3 seconds. The god Kesha took a deep breath. She knew that if she faced this so-called two-dimensional foil, she might be directly transformed into 2 dimensions in the first time. There was a little surprise in her eyes. How could an ordinary civilization make such an ultra-standard weapon? This has even touched the laws of the universe, relying on the laws to cause great damage. Speaking slowly, Kesha suddenly realized a problem. That is, the Blue Star seemed to be a righteous and orderly existence in the last second. But just now, they destroyed an entire galaxy. Although the test weapon of the equipment also asked whether there was civilization in that galaxy before the test, but civilization is civilization, and some things are without civilization. Are things without civilization only to be destroyed? Some beasts, some terrifying monsters, can also be kept as pets for them. There may be some in that galaxy. But now they are all drawn as a small dot on a two-dimensional plane. They can't even make any waves. Is this civilization just or unjust? Does it really contain order? Holy. Kesha began to think quickly. He must label Blue Star and determine whether the other party is just before he can take adequate action. When he encounters Blue Star Earth. Xiaolin opened his mouth wide. At first, He thought those were all fake, but as he looked over, he found that all of this was true. The power displayed by the two-phase foil was beyond his imagination. This is not the ability he can encounter now. He is the heart of the galaxy, and he will be the main god of the entire galaxy in the future. Chapter 20. Energy depletion. New options. Who are ye? Thought in his heart. The light in his eyes began to flash rapidly. However, after hearing his words, the group of soldiers in front of him were not so excited. What's wrong with you? Who are ye? Frowned and said. After hearing his words, the soldiers on the opposite side looked at each other, sighed, and said, that two-dimensional foil is too strong. Yes, facing such an attack, can we really escape unscathed? Evolving directly into a two-dimensional universe, even we may not be able to escape. Too scary. All the male angels showed panic expressions after hearing his words. Who are ye's eyes also showed a little anger. Ah, you all a bunch of idiots. Can he release such an attack at will? And this time we are going to Blue Star. Would you place such a terrifying lethal weapon at your doorstep? This weapon is indeed powerful, but no matter how powerful it is, it can only be released outside. We have already fought at their homes. If they even release such a weapon, don't they want to live? Who are ye? Said with resentment. Sure enough, after hearing his words, the eyes of others jumped slightly. They all showed excited expressions. Yes, if we fight at their doorstep, they will not release such an attack anyway. That's right, we can still kill all their male tribesmen as before, and let the female tribesmen have fun as they please. The male angels looked at each other and all laughed. Looking at the appearance of this group of people at this time, who are ye? Couldn't help but sigh. Okay, don't think so much. Now think about it. How should we distribute all the technologies? After we grab them, we must take the super killer weapon like Xiangbo, which is so terrifying and unsolvable. It must not be distributed to anyone. But in addition, the technology like the 4-dimensional warrior can be given to Karl. Let him help us make the 4-dimensional warrior. Who are ye? Said happily. The eyes of others also nodded slightly at this moment. It's just that they all think that Blue Star is in their pocket. At this time in Blue Star, Lu Xuan looked at the test results of the two-dimensional foil and nodded slowly. It was almost the same as he imagined. But he also fully understood that a terrifying killer weapon like the two-dimensional foil must not be used casually. At least it looks like that. If even such a weapon is used casually, the entire universe will sooner or later become two-dimensional. At that time, even he can't develop other places he wants to develop. At this time, a researcher came to Lu Xuan's side and asked carefully, Chief, with such a weapon, what should we do next? Chapter 21. Besides plundering, there are other ways. Who I group. Who I said coldly. What are you still hesitating about? Their only choice now is invasion, which is their best choice. It's hilarious that you are still pretending here. If I were him, I would definitely choose invasion without hesitation. What are other civilizations besides myself? Killing them all is just for my own fun, which is also very normal, he said with contempt, and the male angels of the Cheyenne group around him nodded repeatedly. When they heard his words, Sumali came up. King, we will all obey your wishes. As long as you choose to plunder, we will become the toughest sword in your hand, and we will kill all other humble civilizations, treat all their men as slaves, and vent their women to our heart's content, and their resources and technology will become our property. King, the location you point to is the direction we are heading. Seeing Sumali speak so well, who I also nodded. You're right. This world will eventually become what we want it to be. As long as we want, we can keep developing. What's the point of pretending? Angel civilization. King, do you mean they won't choose to invade? ZHI. Zin looked at Holy Kesha curiously. After hearing her words, Holy Kesha nodded slightly. If I'm not mistaken, they will definitely not choose to invade. Invasion is not a good choice. It seems that it can solve most of their problems in a short time, but in more cases it will attract more hatred. Perhaps the civilization that is strong enough for them to invade must not have any strong power, but there is always a chance of everything. And what the leader of Blue Star did before means that he is not a cruel killer. If he can make the decision, I believe Blue Star will not choose the path of invasion. Earth. Jet. Xiaolan looked at Yan standing in front of him. Why are you here? Yan ignored Xiaolan and said directly, the invasion of higher civilizations is almost certain. Weakness is the original sin. The moment he heard his words, Xiaolan instantly understood something, and he stared at it and said, do you mean that civilization will definitely choose to invade, and it is even likely to come to Earth to occupy our resources? But why would higher civilizations think so? Are you angels also higher civilizations? Angels are different. Our resources are inexhaustible, and we don't need to plunder lower civilizations to obtain so-called resources. So, angels will always stand on the side of justice to maintain justice, she said calmly, as if angels are always superior and always different. Xiaolan on the opposite side heard this and snorted disdainfully. Since you angels are like this, then that civilization will definitely not invade others. At least I think so. Yan continued to shake his head at this time. Don't you think that blue planet is very similar to your Earth? After my analysis, the similarity between the two sides has reached more than 90%. The only difference is your resource utilization and technology. The difference is still a bit too big. So, what, Jen? Xiaolan looked at Yan curiously. He knew that this angel must have other ideas. If that's the case, your past history can be used as a reference. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22, Dark Forest Law. Chief, I also have a new idea. I think I can tell you about it. Before Lu Xuan spoke, another researcher suddenly spoke. After hearing the other party's words, Lu Xuan nodded. Go ahead. With the technology we have now, we can consume most of the energy. In other words, we can use most of the energy, but this is just us. In comparison, other planets don't have such energy to use. They can only use a single energy source, and what we have to do is to tell them how to use this energy efficiently, help them develop rapidly, and we ourselves get some other energy from them as a reward. This can solve the problem we have set now. Hearing the other party's suggestion, Lu Xuan thought for a moment and shook his head. What you said is actually a kind of colonization. If it's just colonization, we don't need to go to great lengths, and this can only solve the current problem. Later, when their resources are almost used up, they will definitely not supply us with any resources, and by that time, we have already paid too much. Won't we still need to fight in the end? Hearing Lu Xuan's words, the researchers on the opposite side slowly lowered their heads. The other politicians also looked at Lu Xuan curiously, waiting for Lu Xuan's choice. However, there was only a little flicker in Lu Xuan's eyes as for choosing him. It was not made point, because he suddenly thought that the method he had just thought of was somewhat similar to colonization. It just sounds better, but the ending is not much different. Now he needs a new way. And this still requires his thinking. Angel civilization. Sure enough, his final choice was still like this, possessing extremely strong power and the ability to destroy a galaxy. He still maintains the purest quality. We must teach such people well no matter what, because they are born to stand on the side of justice. Sacred. Kesha gave Lu Xuan a very high evaluation point after hearing his words. Zhizhen nodded. I hope they can keep it up. If we can get in touch with them, then we can exchange resources and technology from both sides, and perhaps we can cause a dimensionality reduction attack on those evil civilizations. Xiangan. Number 1. After hearing these words, Hua Yi showed a look of disdain. It's so funny. I thought he would choose colonization or something else in the end. The result is still this kind of indifferent kindness. Can your kindness be exchanged for the kindness of others? This is absolutely nonsense. As long as the other party has different ideas, then they will never regard your kindness as true kindness. It will only be regarded as hypocrisy. No matter what, the war will break out sooner or later. But don't worry, I will personally destroy Blue Star. By that time, the entire Blue Star will become my trial field, and I will not even let you have any ability to resist. I will be your descended king. Mysterious. Civilization. The god of death Karl sat on the throne of the void, looking at the scenes in the play, and shook his head slowly. Chapter 23. Lu Xuan wants to create a supreme civilization? A civilization that is superior to all other civilizations? What is the dark forest? Can there be darkness in the forest? It's just a forest. So what? The scientists on the opposite side looked at each other, not understanding what Lu Xuan said at all point, and Lu Xuan did not hesitate, and continued to speak. The dark forest I'm talking about is what you think. If we compare the vast universe to a forest, all civilizations are hunters and prey in the forest, but when both parties don't know each other, no one knows whether they are hunters or prey, and the dark forest is a chain of suspicion and technological explosion. The so-called chain of suspicion means that when two civilizations meet each other, they don't know whether the other party will bring war or help. They don't even know whether the other party is stronger or weaker than themselves. In this case, crystal alertness becomes the most basic concept. After all, the only thing every civilization has to do to exist in the world is to survive. The scientist on the opposite side nodded slowly. Indeed, survival is the first element, but apart from survival, the two civilizations can only go to war. Lu Xuan shook his head again at this moment. It's not a war, because you don't know whether the other party is stronger or weaker than you. If it's weaker than you, it's fine. Then, if the other party is stronger than you, why do you think that you can easily solve the other party by starting a war at this time, when you don't understand the other party at all? Another scientist stood up. So, when two civilizations meet, they will first guess each other, and will also conduct technical exploration first. After determining the combat power of the other party, they can decide the direction of attack. Lu Xuan nodded, and then shook his head again. You said the essence of the matter, but it's not that simple. When two civilizations meet, they cannot guarantee that the other party will bring goodwill, so in this case, both sides are full of malice. Angel. Civilization. Zhi said curiously, what? Goodwill and malice? When two civilizations meet, shouldn't the first time be communication? Only after communication can the level of both sides be determined. That's true, but what about after that? Is it war or alliance? Just because of the strength of the other party? Then such a person is malicious in nature, and he doesn't even have any good intentions. The holy Kesha shook his head slowly at this time point. There was not much light in his eyes. He understood what Lu Xuan said. When two civilizations meet, the first thing to do is actually to prepare for war, because you don't know whether the other party wants to go to war with you. So being prepared is the only choice. Demon civilization. Hahaha. Suspicion. What's the use of suspicion? It's best to fight directly. Defeat them completely. Crush them completely, then you will always be a hunter, not a prey. Arnold on the side also nodded. The queen is right. We must use the weapons in our hands to crush possible enemies directly, so we don't have to make any suspicions. Xianggang number 1.2 Yi listened to Lu Xuan's words and sneered. Chapter 24. All civilizations are shocked. The Supergod Universe is stunned. Looking at the surprised researchers in front of him. Lu Xuan's eyes flashed and saw all the people who were watching the show. Then he spoke directly. I believe you know what is different about this world. For example, our civilization. Our civilization seems to be developing very strongly now, but you also know when it started to develop. Yes, it has been only in the last 100 years. What about before this 100 years? There was not much development for more than 2000 years. This is the world. We can't imagine whether a civilization will usher in a leapfrog increase in just a few decades or even a few years. In this case, his strength will become stronger, or it will be destroyed directly. No one knows, but if we let ourselves see it, then his civilization will definitely become stronger. So what will you do at this time? Find a way to make friends with him, and when his civilization is sufficient, make a deal with us. The researcher on the opposite side said tentatively. After listening to his words, Lu Xuan at this time shook slowly. It seems that what you said is right, but is it really right? That is absolutely impossible. There is only one real way, that is to take action directly and destroy them completely. When his voice fell, the pupils of everyone present shrank slightly. Yes, if you are not sure whether the other party will be strong, then you can only destroy the other party at this time. Especially when the other party is weaker than you. You must destroy the other party because you have no idea whether he will be good or bad. After making him stronger, if he still has good intentions, it is naturally the best and everyone can develop together. But more often he is malicious at this time. There is only one thing they can do, that is to destroy them in advance to avoid such a situation. But this is a bit too evil, isn't it? In the real Dark Forest, there is no distinction between justice and evil. We only see hunters and prey, but the roles between hunters and prey are constantly changing. Maybe you are a hunter now and can hunt dozens of civilizations, but as long as there is a civilization that is stronger than you will become prey. If your technology suddenly ushered in explosive development, your strength became stronger than other civilizations, then you became a hunter again. No one knows what the real ending is after going back and forth. Lu Xuan shook his head slowly. He naturally knew this truth. So for him, making himself stronger was the only choice. Angel civilization. Kesha's pupils shrank slightly. It turned out to be like this. He believed that all civilizations might usher in a leapfrog growth, so when the opponent's strength was weaker, then the opponent would be directly destroyed. It sounds reasonable, but it is too evil. This is not in line with the civilization of justice at all. Hearing his words, Zixin on the side also nodded repeatedly. That's right. Our justice means that we are always the strongest. At this time, all weak civilizations will be protected by us. Then, in addition, all evil civilizations will be destroyed. But this dark forest seems to make sense. ZHI. Zin's heart was shaken. Kesha on the opposite side saw her at this time and sighed helplessly. Chapter 25. Focus on studying the two-dimensional foil, not being prey. Looking at the shock value that was quickly received. Lu Xuan also smiled at this time. After the theory of the dark forest was revealed, the shock value he obtained was dozens of times higher than the various technologies before. At this time, he understood that these shock values had grown to a terrifying level. But Lu Xuan also understood that when he chose to talk, no matter what he talked about, these formations would quickly dissipate. Hey. This world is still a little more difficult than I thought, but these shock values are enough for the recent use of resources. Yes, Lu Xuan's idea is very simple. Since he doesn't want to invade other civilizations, he doesn't want to be invaded by other civilizations in this case. If you want to get enough resources, then there is only one way left. That is to exchange with the system. Anyway, the resources contained in its system are endless. It's just that these resources themselves still need shock values to exchange. After hesitating for a moment, Lu Xuan exchanged, which can give Blue Star sufficient resources for 5 years. As for the remaining shock value, he plans to keep it and exchange it for more powerful weapons or technology in the future. He knew the technology of Blue Star. If he wanted to advance and advance quickly, then the system he had was inevitable. In other words, it was precisely because of the existence of the system that their technology could be rapidly improved to that terrifying level. Apart from that, other things did not seem to be so needed. Xiangan 1. Yi looked at the scene in front of him. His eyes narrowed slightly. Dark forest. Dark forest. This whole world is a huge dark forest. Damn it, why didn't I think of this before? That Blue Star is definitely not as ordinary as imagined. Since they know the dark forest theory, they are likely to be prepared. If we go there now, we will most likely be caught, he said coldly, with a little fear in his eyes. Sumali, who was standing by, came over and said, Wang, what should we do now? Continue to charge and destroy Blue Star as quickly as possible, or he did not say the rest of the words, because he knew that just these words were enough for Huayi to understand. As expected, after Huayi moved slightly, he turned his head and looked at Sumali beside him. He lifted the other person's collar and threw him out. Then he said loudly, retreat. We can't go to Blue Star now. He is likely to surround us directly. We will become slaves or be killed directly by then, so hurry back now. As for Karl, I will tell him that this time, we were used as a gun by him. I will never let him go, he said loudly, and the wild anger gradually spread. The male angels of the Cheyenne group around him also nodded repeatedly. They quickly turned the entire fleet around. Heading towards the direction of the old heaven. At this moment, they realized the real fear. They could not attack Blue Star again. Karl knew this in an instant, but after knowing it, he just took a deep breath and sighed helplessly. Because he knew that when Huayi found this out himself, nothing would change. Huayi is indeed a pervert and a madman, but he is not stupid. Under such circumstances, he would never let Huayi turn back to attack Blue Star. Even under such circumstances, Huayi might not care about it. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.